When the office went quiet, she leaned closer and whispered words I'll never forget, words that changed everything between us. The office always felt different after hours. During the day, it was alive with the hum of conversations, the ringing of phones, the shuffle of footsteps down the corridor. But once the clock passed 7, silence took over. Only the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights remained, broken occasionally by the soft click of my keyboard. Papers lay scattered across my desk, lit by the muted glow of the desk lamp, and beyond the wide windows the city stretched out in glittering streams of gold and red. I wasn't supposed to be here this late. Most people had already gone home, their chairs neatly pushed in, their computers sleeping in darkness. But I told myself I had work to finish. Maybe that was true, or maybe it was just easier to stay than to step back into the emptiness of my small apartment. I didn't hear her footsteps at first. I only noticed when a shadow stretched across my desk, and I lifted my eyes to find her standing there. My boss. Her presence always carried a kind of quiet gravity, even when she wasn't trying. Tonight, though, there was something softer in the way she leaned on the edge of my desk, her arms loosely crossed, her eyes following the glow of my screen. "You're still here," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp, not the clipped tone she used in meetings. It was lower, quieter, as if the silence of the empty office had drawn something gentler from her. I nodded, shifting slightly in my chair. "Just trying to finish up." She smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The dim light picked up the delicate lines at their corners, not marks of age but of long days, long years of carrying responsibility on her shoulders. There was a weariness about her, but also a grace I couldn't name. "You don't have to rush," she said. Then, after a pause, her gaze flicked back to me. "But I'm glad you stayed." The words were simple, yet they lingered in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. My chest tightened, though I wasn't sure why. Something in her tone carried more than professionalism, as if, just for a moment, I wasn't her employee but someone she wanted near. Her perfume drifted in the quiet, a subtle trace of jasmine and warmth that felt oddly comforting. She leaned a little closer, resting one hand lightly on the desk near mine. The sound of the office clock ticked behind us, marking each second in the hush. I forced myself to glance back at the screen, but the words blurred. My focus had shifted entirely to her, the softness in her voice, the way her presence filled the space, and the unmistakable truth that tonight was already unlike any other. She didn't leave after saying those words. Instead, she stayed where she was, perched on the edge of my desk, her fingers tracing the corner of a file that had long lost my attention. The soft curve of her smile was different from the one she used at work, less polished, more vulnerable, as though she was unsure how much to let me see. "You always work harder than anyone else," she said quietly, her eyes following the faint glow of the lamp. "Most people do just enough to get by. But not you. You stay." Her voice slowed on that last word, almost as if she were weighing its meaning. It sent a ripple through me, a warmth spreading across my chest. I wanted to answer, to explain that it wasn't about dedication, that sometimes staying late was easier than facing the silence of home. But her tone wasn't really about work, and we both knew it. The office felt different with her so close. The fluorescent lights above seemed softer, shadows curling gently across her face. Her perfume lingered in the still air, faint but impossible to ignore, like the trace of spring carried in on a breeze. She shifted her weight slightly, the quiet scrape of her heels on the floor the only sound between us. "I notice things," she continued, her voice low. "Even when people think I don't. And I notice you." The words landed in me like a spark. My fingers froze above the keyboard. I turned to her, searching her face for a clue, wondering if I had imagined the warmth in her tone. But her eyes were steady, her gaze holding mine without flinching, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected, a kind of gentle admiration, tinged with loneliness. For the first time, I allowed myself to really look at her, not as the boss who carried herself with polished confidence, but as a woman sitting inches away, her guard quietly slipping. She looked tired, yes, but beautifully so, as if strength itself had a cost, and she'd paid it day after day until tonight, when she'd chosen to set some of it down. I swallowed, my throat dry. I like knowing I did everything I could. It was all I could manage, my words small compared to the weight of what I was feeling. Her smile deepened, softer now, as though my answer had touched something in her. She leaned closer, her hand brushing the desk, only inches from mine. The air shifted, not colder, not warmer, just charged, alive in a way I hadn't felt before. And in that moment I knew this wasn't about late-night reports or extra hours. It was about her choosing to stay, too. The papers on my desk no longer mattered. She had settled onto the chair beside me, the kind of seat usually reserved for short instructions or quick approvals, but tonight it felt different. She sat close enough that I could hear the soft rhythm of her breathing, close enough that the space between us no longer felt professional. For a moment neither of us spoke. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, steady and low, like a backdrop to something fragile being built in the quiet. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from deeper than she intended, she leaned back and let her gaze rest on the ceiling. "You know," she began, her voice carrying a faint thread of weariness. "People assume I have it all figured out. That being in charge means I'm strong all the time." She paused, almost as if testing whether she should go on. "But sometimes it's exhausting. Pretending to have all the answers." Her words surprised me. She never showed cracks during the day, never stumbled, never hesitated. To see her like this, stripped of that polished armor, stirred something inside me. I shifted in my chair, turning toward her. "I don't think anyone has all the answers," I said softly. "I sure don't." She let out a quiet laugh, one that wasn't mocking but tinged with relief, as though my honesty gave her permission to keep unraveling. "You're young," she said, her eyes flicking back to mine. "But you listen in a way people twice your age don't. That's rare." Her words settled warmly in my chest. I wanted to tell her that listening to her never felt like work, that every word she offered carried weight I couldn't ignore. Instead, I only nodded, my throat too tight to form more. Her fingers moved absent-mindedly across the desk, tracing the edge of a pen. When it rolled, I instinctively reached for it, and for a split second our hands nearly touched. The distance between skin and skin was so slight that I felt the warmth of her presence as if it were already there. Her eyes flicked down to that almost touch, then back up to mine. Neither of us pulled away. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was alive, threaded with something I didn't have words for. My chest tightened, and I realized this wasn't a conversation between a boss and an employee anymore. This was two people peeling back layers, finding common ground in their unspoken loneliness. She broke the stillness with a whisper. "It's nice talking like this. Without roles. Without masks." I swallowed hard, my voice low when I finally managed to answer. "Yeah. It is." And in that fragile exchange, I knew something unshakable had begun, a closeness that no title, no office walls, could contain. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking time that no longer seemed to matter. The world outside the office was moving on, cars streaming down the streets, lights flickering in tall buildings, but here, in this quiet corner, time felt suspended. She reached for a folder on the desk, her movement unhurried, almost distracted, as though the papers were only an excuse. Her hand brushed against mine, light at first, like a stray accident. But then, it lingered. Every nerve in my body seemed to wake in that instant. Her skin was warm, delicate, the faintest pressure against my knuckles. Not firm, not fleeting, but steady enough to carry meaning. My breath caught, though I tried to hide it, and I looked up. Her eyes were already on me. The gaze she held wasn't casual. It wasn't the measured look she gave during meetings or when making decisions. It was softer, slower, charged with something unspoken. The kind of look that asks a question without ever forming the words. For a heartbeat, either of us moved. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, steady but somehow distant, as though the whole room had drawn back to leave only the two of us suspended in that fragile space. I wanted to say something, but words felt clumsy compared to the language of her touch. The warmth of her hand against mine spoke louder than anything I could offer. I didn't pull away. Her lips parted slightly, as if she might speak, then closed again. Instead, she let her fingers curl just a little closer, the back of her hand grazing mine, a whisper of contact that sent a quiet shiver through me. I didn't know if I should respond, if I should mirror the touch, but my hesitation wasn't rejection, it was awe. I had never seen her like this, never imagined that the woman who carried authority so naturally could look at me this way, searching, vulnerable, waiting. Finally, I shifted my hand, not much, just enough so that my fingers brushed the side of hers. A small gesture, but in the stillness it felt monumental. She inhaled, almost too softly to hear, and the sound itself was intimate, as though she had allowed me into a space few others had ever been invited. The distance between us was shrinking, not measured in inches but in barriers that were quietly falling away. Her hand lingered on mine a moment longer before she finally drew it back slowly, like someone reluctant to leave warmth behind. Her eyes held mine a second longer though, and in them I saw the truth I had only guessed at before. This wasn't about work. It never had been. Her hand had just slipped back, but the imprint of her touch still lingered on my skin. The office was quiet again, though nothing about it felt the same. Every hum of the lights, every tick of the clock seemed sharper, charged with what had just passed between us. She laughed softly, the sound low and almost self-conscious, nothing like the confident voice she used when leading a room. Her fingers tapped lightly on the folder she'd picked up, though she didn't open it. "You know," she began, her tone fragile, "I didn't really need you to stay tonight." The words startled me. I turned toward her fully, searching her face. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away, as if the admission cost her something. "The reports, they could have waited," she continued, her smile faint and rueful. "But I didn't want to leave the office just yet. And I didn't want to be alone here either." Her honesty shifted something inside me. For so long, I had seen her as untouchable, steady, decisive, unshaken by the demands pressing on her every day. But now she sat beside me, revealing the quiet loneliness behind the poise. I swallowed, my voice low when it finally came. "So, you asked me to stay because you wanted company?" Her eyes lifted again, meeting mine directly this time. There was no pretense left in them, only truth. "Because I wanted you here," she whispered. The admission hit me with a weight far heavier than the words themselves. My chest tightened, my breath catching before I could steady it. I wasn't sure what to say, and perhaps she didn't need an answer. She had already crossed the invisible line between what was expected and what was real. I could see it in her expression, the tension of someone used to holding everything together, now allowing herself to set it down, if only for a moment. She leaned back slightly, her shoulders dropping as though letting out a burden she had carried too long. "People see me as strong," she said, almost more to herself than to me. "But strength gets heavy when no one's there to share it." Her vulnerability stirred something deep in me. I wanted to reach across the space, to reassure her, to show her she didn't have to hold all of it alone. But instead I let my silence speak. Sometimes words would only cheapen what was too pure to explain. Her gaze softened, as if she understood. A small smile touched her lips, not polished or practiced but real, carrying the relief of being seen. In that moment, the wall between us crumbled. Boss and employee no longer mattered. It was simply a woman and a man, both tired of loneliness, both quietly relieved to have found each other in the quiet hours. Silence wrapped around us again, but this time it felt different, no longer empty, no longer heavy. It was alive, pulsing with the weight of her confession and the unspoken feelings lingering between us. She sat close enough that I could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her breath slowed as though she were finally allowing herself to rest. Her hand shifted, brushing lightly against my arm. It was a simple touch, almost hesitant, but it carried more than words ever could. I felt the warmth of her skin seep through the thin fabric of my shirt, a quiet reassurance that this wasn't just a passing thought, it was real. I turned toward her, and in that moment, everything else slipped away. The piles of papers, the ticking clock, even the city lights beyond the window, none of it mattered. All I saw was her, the strength she carried, the vulnerability she just revealed, and the way her eyes searched mine as if asking for permission to need someone. Slowly, carefully, she leaned closer. Her hand slid up from my arm to my shoulder, resting there with a kind of quiet trust. Her touch was gentle but steady, as though she were anchoring herself in a place she hadn't allowed before. I felt my chest tighten, not with nerves but with something deeper, a recognition that this was a moment neither of us could step back from unchanged. When she finally moved into my embrace, it was not with suddenness but with care. Her arms slipped around my shoulders, tentative at first, then firmer, as she allowed herself to let go. Her cheek came to rest against my chest, the soft brush of her skin just beneath my collarbone. For a long breath, I didn't move. I simply felt her there, the weight of her body leaning into mine, the warmth of her closeness, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat pressed faintly against my chest. Each beat seemed to echo through me, calming and electric all at once. I lifted my arms slowly, not wanting to break the fragility of the moment, and wrapped them around her. She fit there naturally, as if she'd been meant to lean into someone and had finally found the courage to allow it. My hands rested lightly against her back, the soft fabric of her blouse cool under my palms, her form beneath it warm and real. Her breathing slow deepened. She let out a quiet sigh, and I felt it against me, a warm rush that sent shivers down my spine. For the first time, it didn't feel like I was holding the boss. It felt like I was holding her, a woman who had spent too long carrying the weight of everything alone. And in that embrace, the world outside ceased to exist. When she finally pulled back, it wasn't with reluctance but with a quiet kind of certainty, as though she had found something she hadn't even realized she'd been searching for. Her hands lingered on my shoulders a moment longer, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of my shirt before they slipped away. Her eyes found mine again, steady now, carrying a softness that hadn't been there before. The mask she usually wore in the office, polished, confident, untouchable, was gone. What remained was something far more real, a woman unafraid to let someone see her heart. "I shouldn't be asking this," she whispered, her voice barely more than breath. "But stay, please." The words were different from the ones she'd used earlier that evening. They weren't a command, not the crisp tone of a boss giving instructions. They were a plea, fragile, human, and spoken with the hope that I might understand what she couldn't yet explain aloud. I felt the weight of them settle into me, and without hesitation I nodded. "I will." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, one that spoke of relief, of gratitude, and perhaps of something deeper that neither of us dared name just yet. She reached down then, her hand finding mine naturally, as though it belonged there. Her fingers threaded through mine with an ease that surprised us both, the warmth of her touch grounding us in this new, unspoken truth. We didn't speak as we gathered our things. The silence wasn't awkward, it was comforting, filled with the knowledge that words weren't necessary. The simple rhythm of her hand in mine said more than conversation ever could. When we stepped out of the office, the night air greeted us with a cool rush, carrying the faint scent of rain on the horizon. The city stretched before us, alive with lights and motion, yet I felt cocooned in the quiet bond we had formed. She paused at the edge of the building, turning to face me once more. "This changes everything," she said softly. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling the truth of her words settle between us. "Then let it." Her eyes shimmered in the glow of the streetlights, and for the first time that night, she didn't look tired. She looked alive, her burdens lighter, her presence radiant in a way I'd never seen before. We walked side by side into the night, our steps unhurried, as though time itself had slowed to make room for us. The world still saw us as boss and employee, but in that moment, titles no longer mattered. What mattered was the connection born in the quiet hours, the fragile trust that had deepened into something undeniable. And as her hand tightened gently around mine, I knew this wasn't the end of a late-night shift. It was the beginning of something neither of us had dared to imagine, yet both of us had been waiting for all along.